Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, we will be talking about the structuralist criticism. So, structuralist criticism is a major literary theory that emerged in the mid 20th century, focuses on the underlying structures and patterns within the text, rather than its surface meaning or authorial intent. It draws inspiration from the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist who argued that language is a system of signs where meaning is derived from the relationship between their signs. So, structuralist criticism is a prominent literary theory that emerged in the 20th century. It delves into the underlying structures and patterns within the text rather than focusing solely on its surface meaning or the author's intended message. Swajure's concept of the sign as a combination of signifier, the word or symbol, and a signified, which is the concept it represents, is central structuralist thought. This concept highlights the arbitrary nature of language, as the connection between the signifier and the signified is not inherent but rather established through convention and shared understanding within a particular linguistic community. So they examine elements like characters, plot, and narrative structure to identify the underlying patterns, relationship, and codes that govern the text meaning. Next is the sign system. Structuralists believe that the texts are like language functioning as a system of signs. Each element within the text, word, characters, events, etc., holds meaning only in relation to other elements within the system. So it reviews texts, complex systems of signs, similar to how language functions. This means that each element within a text, whether it is a word, character, event, or any other component, derives its meaning not from an inherent quality but its relationship to other elements within the system. So it views text as a complex system of signs similar to how language functions. This means that each element within a text, whether it is a word, character, event, or any other component, derives its meaning not from an inherent quality but from its relationship to other elements within the system. Structuralist criticism sees language as a system of signs, where each sign consists of a signifier, the physical form like a word or image, and the signified or the concept meaning it represents. So, like for example, the word tree is the signifier, and the concept of a tall, woody is the signified. Next is the binary oppositions. Structuralists analyze text by identifying pairs of contrasting concepts, for example, good versus evil, light versus dark, male versus female, that are crucial to the text meaning. These oppositions are not inherent but are constructed by the text itself. Binary opposition is a fundamental concept in structuralist criticism. They refer to pairs of contrasting concepts that are central to the meaning and structure of a text. These oppositions are not inherent into the world but are constructed by the text itself, creating a framework through which meaning is generated. So, binary opposition often reveals the underlying themes and ideologies of a text. So, here are the examples. First is good versus evil. So this classic opposition is found in countless narratives, shaping the moral landscape and driving the conflict. Next is the light versus dark. Light often symbolizes knowledge, goodness, and hope, while the darkness represents ignorance, evil, and despair. And also the male versus female. The opposition explores the differences and tensions between genders. It often reflecting societal norms and power dynamics. So, by analyzing binary oppositions, structuralist critics aims to understand the fundamental structures and system that govern the meaning and impact of a text. These oppositions are not simply surface level contrast, but reveal the deeper underlying themes, conflicts, and ideologies that shapes the narratives. And the third one is the deep structure. Structuralists believe that beneath the surface of a text lies its deeper underlying structure that governs its meaning. So, this deep structure is a universal and can be applied to various texts. Structuralist believes that texts are like houses. They have visible surface, the words and sentences we read. But beneath the surface, there is a hidden framework called the deep structure. This deep structure is like a skeleton of the house, providing the framework or providing the underlying foundation for the text's meaning. So think of this way: surface structure, the word on the page, the plot, the characters, everything we directly see and read. Next is the deep structure, the underlying principles, patterns, and relationship that shape the text meaning. So the deep structure is like a set of universal rules that apply to many different texts. So it's like a blueprint that guides construction of meaning, even if the specific details of each text are different. So many stories follow a basic structure, and here is the basic structure. First is the introduction. We meet the characters and learn about the setting. Second is the rising action. The conflict builds and the characters faces their challenges. Third is the climax, the highest point of tension, where conflict reaches its peak. Fourth is the falling action. The conflict resolves and characters learn a lesson. And lastly is the resolution. The story ends and everything is wrapped up. So it is a universal pattern that helps us to understand and enjoy stories. So next is myth and archetypes. Structuralists often analyze texts in terms of recurring myth and archetypes, which they believe are universal patterns of human experiences. Archetypes are like blueprints of for characters and situations that resonate with our deepest human experiences. They represent universal ideas like good versus evil, love versus hate, or the struggle for power. While myths are stories that explain the world and our place in it, they often feature archetypes and explore themes like creation, death, love, loss. These stories help us to understand ourselves, our relationship, and the world around us. So with this, we can gain better understanding of the meaning of the story. So now let's discuss how structuralist criticism work. So first is identify the text sign system. Analyze the elements of the text and their relationship to each other. So in structuralist criticism, the focus on identifying the underlying structures and systems within a text, such as language, symbols, or codes, and how these elements interact with each other. So here are the process works step by step. First step is to identify the text sign system. Structuralist is based on the idea that language and cultures are system of signs where each sign consists of a signifier and a signified. Your task here is to identify these signs within the text. So, signifiers are the words, phrases, images, or symbols present in the text, and the signified are the meanings or concept associated with the signifiers. So, for example, you are analyzing a novel or a poem. You need to look at the characters as signifiers of a particular idea. Like, for example, hero. Hero might signify bravery, honor, and or sacrifice. Second step is to analyze the element of the text and their relationship. Once you have identified the signs, the next step is to see how these elements are organized and how they interact with one another. Structuralist analysis look for patterns, oppositions, and structures that govern the relationship between these signs. Second is to uncover the binary oppositions, identify the key contrasting concept that shape the text meaning. So, for the binary opposition, structuralists often focus on pairs of opposites as what I have mentioned earlier, like good versus evil, light versus dark, male versus female, to see how the text contracts meaning through this relationship. For the structural patterns, it is how do the signs repeat or contrast with each other through the text. For example, are there recurring themes, motifs, and narratives devices that help to create a larger structure of meaning? Next is the intertextuality. How does the text relate to other texts within the same system? Are there references or allusions that add layers of the meaning?
So, number three in how structuralist criticism works is analyze text structure. So, structuralism, particularly in literary theory, posits that all texts, regardless of their surface differences, are governed by a deep structure and underlying set of rules, patterns, or relationship that shape meaning. And this deep structure is believed to be universal, meaning that it operates across different texts and genres, providing a framework for interpretation. So lastly is relate the text to myths and archetypes. So in structuralist theory, myths and archetypes are seen as fundamental recurring elements that reflect universal patterns of human experiences. So, structuralists argue that these elements transcend individual texts and cultures, revealing deeper truths about human nature and society. So, by identifying these recurring motifs, structuralists believe we can better understand how meaning is constructed across different narratives. So now let's talk about the strength of a structuralist criticism. So, structuralist criticism has several key strengths, including systematic approach, reveals hidden meanings, and universal framework. So, let's talk about the systematic approach. So, it offers a structured and consistent method of analyzing text, focusing on underlying patterns, structure rather, and codes rather than individual content. And next is it reveals hidden meanings. So by emphasizing the deep structures that govern language and meaning, structuralist criticism uncovers hidden layers of meanings that might not be immediately of use. And lastly is the universal framework. So structuralism provides a universal framework for analysis that can be applied to a variety of texts across genres and cultures, making it highly adaptable and useful for comparative analysis. So next is its limitations. So structuralist criticism also has several limitations. So it includes overly abstract and theoretical, neglect authorial intent and historical context, and lastly is reduces text and predetermined. So let's talk about the overly abstract and theoretical. So its emphasis on abstract structures can make the analysis feel disconnected from the actual experiences of reading and understanding a text, and and focusing more on theory than on interpretation. Next is neglects authorial intent and historical context. So structuralism largely disregards the intention of the author and the historical or cultural context in which a text was produced. So which can be it can be seen as a limitation when these factors are crucial to understanding a work. And lastly, we have reduces text to predetermined patterns. So structuralist analysis tends to reduce text to fixed, predetermined structures or codes, potentially overlooking the uniqueness of individual works and limiting the interpretative scope. So now, let's analyze the story Little Red Riding Hood through the lens of a structuralist approach. So, to analyze Little Riding Hood through a structuralist approach, we can focus on the story's underlying structures, patterns, and binary oppositions, as well as the roles of characters and their functions within the story. So, when we talk about the narrative structure, so structuralist criticism, particularly influenced by the work of Vladimir Propp, looks at recurring pattern in folk tales. So Little Riding Hood can be broken down into common narrative functions found in many fairy tales. So in first, we have the initial situation, which is Little Riding Hood sets off from the home, given a task by her her mother, which is to deliver food to her grandmother. So next is the departure. So she enters the forest, a space of danger and uncertainty. So the encounters comes next. So she meets the wolf, a symbol of deception and predation. And next is the deception. This is when the wolf tricks Little Riding Hood into revealing where her grandmother lives and gets there first. Next is the transgression, which the wolf disguises itself as the grandmother and devours her. And later, Little Red Riding Hood. Next is the resolution. It is, in some versions, a hunter or woodsman comes to rescue her by defeating the wolf, restoring order and safety. So this structure emphasizes the sequence of familiar fairy tale events from departure, danger, conflict, and resolution, which we can see in other fairy tales. So next is the binary opposition. So structuralists also emphasize the importance of binary opposition. So in the text, Little Riding Hood is full of these contrasts. It is full of these contrasts which shape its meaning. So first is good versus evil. So Little Riding Hood represents innocence versus the wolf, which represents deception and danger. Next is nature versus civilization. The forest represent wild or unknown versus the village and home, which represents safe and familiar. Next is human versus animal. So Red Riding Hood and her grandma represents the human versus the wolf, which represents the animalistic instincts. So lastly is the appearance versus the reality. So the wolf disguises itself as the grandmother, blurring the line between what is seen and what is true. These oppositions are central to the story, highlighting the tension between safety and danger, innocence and corruption, trust and betrayal. Next is the character functions. So from a structuralist perspective, characters in the tale can be seen as archetype rather than individuals with unique personalities. So each character functions to fulfill a particular role in the narrative. So first is the hero. Red Riding Hood, she represents innocence and vulnerability, as well as the one in need of rescue. Next is the villain. So the wolf, he embodies deception, danger, and evil, representing the external threat. Next is the donor or the helper. So in some versions, the woodsman or the hunter who restores order by saving Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. And lastly is the dispatcher, the mother. She sets the story in motion by sending Little Red Riding Hood on her journey. So these character roles fit into familiar archetypes that recur across different fairy tales and narratives. And lastly is the universal themes. So through a structuralist lens, Little Red Riding Hood can be seen as part of a larger system of fairy tales that express universal themes such as coming of age. The story can be interpreted as a journey from childhood innocence to awareness of the dangers of the adult world. Next is the trust and deception. The wolf's trickery and Little Red Riding Hood's naivety reflect broader culture concerns about trust, particularly the dangers of trusting strangers. So in conclusion, in a structuralist analysis, Little Red Riding Hood is not viewed as a unique or personal story, but as a product of a system of signs and structures that define meaning. The tale's patterns of narrative functions, binary oppositions, and archetypal characters are part of the larger universal language of a fairy tale. The focus on structure helps reveal how the story fits into a broader tradition of storytelling, showing commonalities with other tales rather than focusing on its individual details or origin. So that's the analysis of Little Red Riding Hood through the lens of structuralist approach. Thank you.